So hello, I'm Amanda Maxham. I'm a writer and a research associate here at the Ayn Rand Institute, and I'm excited to talk to you tonight about GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that you've probably heard about GMOs. Maybe you've never heard of a GMO before. That's okay, we'll get to that as well. But first I want to introduce you to a specific GMO, the Arctic apple. Well, this apple was invented by a small biotechnology company based in Canada called Okanagan Specialty Fruits. In March, it was approved for sale in the United States and in Canada. And although it may look like any other Granny Smith apple, this apple is different. This apple doesn't turn brown when sliced. When a regular apple is sliced, bitten, or bruised, two chemicals within the apple's flesh combine, and that, along with oxygen, triggers a browning reaction and turns the flesh of the apple brown. Using the technology of genetic engineering, scientists at Okanagan inserted an extra copy of a single apple gene into the apple, suppressing the production of one of these two chemicals. So when the Arctic apple is sliced or bitten, it doesn't turn brown. Now, my mom was right. There's nothing wrong with a brown apple. It doesn't indicate there's something wrong or rotten about it. But brown apple slices have long been the scourge of the school lunchbox. Mine especially. Sliced apples are used in Happy Meals and on top of salads, but those apples must be sprayed with an expensive coating that changes the flavor. But the Arctic apple makes that a thing of the past. It's a simple yet spectacular invention, and it could save the food service industry millions. Now compare that to another revolutionary apple, the iPhone. Where else can you surf the web, snap a photo, call a cab, get driving directions, and reach out and touch someone, all within the same sleek little touchscreen device that fits in your pocket? Apple recently came out with a new iPhone, the iPhone 6, pictured here. But I want to compare the releases of these two different apples. So, each time Apple Computers releases a new product, there's a buzz of excitement. The announcement is typically made at a big trade show. People speculate about how the new product will perform. People sit at their computers to be there at the stroke of midnight, to press the button, to order one, to be the very first to have one of these in their pockets. Bloggers, they can't wait to review the product, and lines typically form around the corner at Apple stores, and the iPhone 6 was no exception. Sure, some people complained about the shape of the bezels and that it didn't have the storage options that they wanted, but the general attitude and feeling was one of excitement and one of anticipation. But that's in stark contrast to the Arctic apple's release. Yeah, there was anticipation before, but it wasn't the good kind. The USDA has on their website an environmental review where they take comments from the public. They received 73,000 comments from consumers. The overwhelming majority of these were negative. People called the apple poison. They called it a threat to apple growers everywhere. Activist groups like Friends of the Earth sent letters to fast food companies and baby food brands and grocery stores, pressuring them to shun the apple in their Happy Meals and in their salads. GMO Free USA, which is an anti-GMO activist group, said, quote, "We don't need no stinking GMO apples," unquote. Now, Neil Carter, he's the president of Okanagan. He did win an award, the Canadian Gold Leaf Award for Food Innovation in April. And I'm sure that there are people there who were excited to see him receive the award. But also there, the Organic Consumers Association. They plan to wait outside, waving signs and banners in protest of what they call the Frankenapple. Now, these two disparate reactions got me to thinking, why is it in so many aspects of our lives that people clamor for new technology? We don't accept too few USB ports on our computers. When people get sick, we want the very best that medical technology has to offer. But when it comes to food, the reaction is different. So chances are, if you've heard about GMOs, the latest technology when it comes to food, what you've heard is some pretty scary stuff. A virtual army of TV nutritionists like Dr. Oz to fast food restaurants like Chipotle give us the same message. that GMOs are something to fear and avoid, that they could be causing serious health risks like cancer and diabetes. They're doused with dangerous pesticides. And if you want the very best food for you and your family, what kind of food are you supposed to buy?
Organic.
Organic, yeah. Organic foods, by definition, cannot contain genetically engineered ingredients. As Chipotle's new advertising campaign states, when it comes to our food, genetically modified ingredients don't make the cut. But as loud as these voices have been, a silent revolution in food has literally been springing forth from the ground. Since the first biotech seeds were pushed into the ground over 20 years ago, they've taken the world by storm. In the United States, genetically engineered varieties of corn, of soybeans, of beet, of cotton, of canola, engineered to resist insect attacks or to allow farmers to easily deal with weeds, represent 80% or more of those crops planted. Last year around the globe, about 18 million farmers pushed trillions of biotech seeds into millions of acres of dirt. Genetic engineering has been one of the most rapidly adopted technologies in the history of mankind. But we're at a fork in the road. Thanks. Look at Europe, people say. In most countries in Europe, GMOs are treated as dangerous enough to require a label if they aren't banned entirely. And Americans, they're waking up, we're told. A few cities and counties in places like Oregon, Hawaii, and California have made the very act of planting a biotech seed a crime. The state of Vermont recently passed a mandatory labeling law mandating that any food containing biotech ingredients has to have a label. And that's the direction we should be heading, we're told. And the voices that are telling us that, they're loud. So tonight I want to examine some of the things that you've probably heard about GMOs, and I'll tell you why, again and again, activists have it exactly wrong when it comes to the technology of genetic engineering. Okay, but first, what is genetic engineering? Well, the DNA in your cells determines the traits that you'll have. For example, it determines what color eyes you'll have, what color hair you'll have. I think of genes as recipes in an organism's recipe book. In plants, genes determine all sorts of characteristics, from the color of a kernel of corn, to how sweet it will be, to how tall or short the plant will grow. By mapping the genome of crop plants like corn and soybeans, scientists have been able to determine which genes or which recipes determine which traits. And that's allowed them to unlock the DNA. And by inserting genes from other plants or sometimes from common soil microorganisms, by inserting these genes in just the right place, scientists are able to change the characteristics or the traits of a plant. In other words, they've been able to give the plant a new recipe that gives the plant a desirable trait. This technology has been used to improve on a number of food crops, such as making corn that repels insects in the field, orange trees that are resistant to disease, bananas that contain much needed vitamins, or of course, apples that don't go brown. And it plays on what human beings have been doing for ages, improving upon plants. Virtually everything in the grocery store, with the exception of wild fish and mushrooms, has been completely and radically altered from its original state. Have you ever seen that movie Encino Man? Brendan Fraser, Pauly Shore, Sean Astin. So if you haven't, the idea is that they dig up a caveman in their backyard, 2 high school students, and he comes back to life after thawing out. In the movie, the caveman is really excited about a candy bar and a slushie. But forget about a candy bar, because a caveman would be totally blown away by something as simple as an ear of corn. What we know of as corn started out as a grass-like plant with tiny cob-like fruits. Mesoamerican people over 5,000 years ago began selecting the seeds that they liked and discarding the rest. Our ancestors, without knowing anything about genes or DNA, were changing it, and changing it for the better. Genetic engineering is a precision tool. If you imagine the genome of a plant is like a book, genetic engineering amounts to editing a few sentences to make it read better. Genetic engineering is the latest step in a steady march forward of food improvement. But rather than a painstaking process of generations of plants and people, this engineering can be done quickly. The first genetically engineered commercial crops were planted in the late 1990s. And as those first biotech seedlings were growing silently in the fields, a movement arose opposing them. Cancer, autism, Parkinson's, cirrhosis, diabetes, allergies. GMOs are blamed for a whole pile of diseases. It's not uncommon to find anti-GMO groups on Facebook sharing photos and memes that liken GMOs to poison. Food documentaries like Genetic Roulette tell us that Americans are sick and they're getting sicker. What could be causing all these diseases? Well, as Jeffrey Smith, nutritionist and food documentarian, says, the answer could be right in front of you. It could be GMOs. What's the evidence to back up this extraordinary claim? Well, activists like Smith think they found a correlation between rates of disease and the adoption of genetically engineered foods. When pressed, they may show you something like this. Now, this is a complex graph, and for our purposes, I just want you to notice two things. One, this blue line here, that represents the percent of genetically engineered corn and soybean crops planted. And the yellow bars represent the number of incidents of liver cancer. This is a real scientific-looking graph. When the blue line goes up, looks like the yellow bars rise in accordance. The two seem to be correlated. They look related. Certainly, activists say, this should be reason enough for us to question the safety of genetically engineered foods. But this claim is silly. In science and logic, correlation does not imply causation. Plotting two things together and then making extravagant claims, it's not science. Here's a similarly conceived graph. Could it be that our love of margarine is causing divorces in Maine? Obviously not. But similarly, claiming that I have the cure for a whole pile of unrelated diseases without an inkling of a cause, based upon plotting two things together on a graph, that's worse than irresponsible. So what does the real science show? What do real studies show? Well, the genetically engineered foods that are on the market today have been studied extensively to make sure that they're safe to eat. Over 2,000 studies are available where scientists have tested varieties of corn, soybeans, and other GMOs to make sure that they're safe. And these studies all show the same thing, that GMOs are just as safe to eat as conventional varieties. Despite the fact that most people don't know what a GMO is, chances are they ate one for breakfast. 80 to 90% of food on store shelves contain biotech ingredients. And trillions of meals containing biotech ingredients have been eaten by both people and feed animals. And they haven't caused a single ill health effect. Not a tummy ache, not a sniffle. That's trillion with a T. Even government agencies like the European Food Safety Authority, the National Science Foundation, and the FDA weigh in. And they all conclude the same thing, that these foods pose no particular and no special risk. But again, that's probably not what you've heard. Saying that GMOs are just ordinary food, that's not sensational. What you've probably heard is that GMOs cause tumors in lab animals. In 2012, a French scientist named SERALINI made headlines when he announced the results of a rat feeding study. He and a team of engineers took a small group of tumor-prone rats and fed them genetically engineered corn and had them drink a common herbicide, glyphosate. These tumor-prone rats developed, what do you think? Tumors, that's right. Pictures of gloved hands holding up tumor-laden rats went viral. The news was tweeted and blogged over 1.5 million times. Headlines shouted things like, genetically engineered foods found to cause tumors in lab animals. Now these tumor-prone rats, they're common in cancer research. You want to have a large signal of disease so that you can more easily study it. But this study did nothing to further our understanding of cancer, and the study was later retracted from the journal that had published it for containing shoddy science. Why? Well, for example, the control group. So that's the group of rats that was not fed GMO corn and did not drink herbicide, also developed tumors. Sure, they developed fewer tumors, but with such a small group of rats, just 20, the researchers got lucky. There's no way that the study could have any meaning. It would be like if I stuck my hand into a bag of M&Ms, pulled out 2, noticed that they're both brown, and then made the claim that all M&Ms are brown. Even grade school science fair students know better. This study belongs on the trash heap of bad science. But this one ill-conceived study is still cited by activists, and the pictures of tumor-laden rats, they still show up in any Google image search of GMO. But the claim that GMOs cause disease, it's bogus. Instead, the exact opposite is true. GMOs are being invented that could help combat disease. The World Health Organization estimates that between 250,000 and 500,000 people go blind each year for lack of vitamin A. 500,000 people, I don't know how to make that real to you, but it'd be like the population of Atlanta, all of them, going blind every year. What's worse, the majority of these are children, and what's even worse than that is that many of these malnourished children are dead within a year. But that's exactly the problem that scientists Ingo Petrinkus and Peter Baer hope to solve with their solution, or with their invention, golden rice. By transferring a gene from a corn and one from a common soil microorganism into a rice plant, these scientists were able to turn on rice's capability to produce beta-carotene, or provitamin A. When people eat foods containing beta-carotene, such as spinach or carrots, the body converts it to the vitamin A that you need with some efficiency. Now, Petrinkus and Baer, they knew that the problem wasn't that primarily these children weren't getting enough calories. The problem was that they were eating almost exclusively rice. But eating a bowl of golden rice, it's like eating a bowl of rice with some spinach mixed in. For people on the edge of vitamin A deficiency, this rice could really help them. For them, it could prevent the world from going dark. Now, the idea was simple: offer the rice for free to any poor third world farmers who wanted to plant it. These farmers could then plant the rice, plant it again the next year, and pass it on to their neighbors. The rice could spread like a wildfire, lighting up the world. But it hasn't. Petrinkus and Baer had the idea for golden rice in the 1980s, and they worked hard for years. In 1999, they had invented golden rice, but it has helped precisely no one. An army of activists like VANDANA SHIVA, she's an Indian eco-activist, she's worked hard to block the rice from reaching the third world poor who might want to plant and eat it. She calls golden rice a hoax and claims that since farmers may prefer to plant it over the older varieties of rice that they had been planting, it's a dangerous threat to biodiversity, and therefore, there's no possible way it could provide people with nutrition. Whenever a field or feeding trial takes place, GREENPEACE is there, scaring the local population, whether that's in China or the Philippines, into thinking that the rice they're eating is poisonous. When that doesn't work, they simply break into research fields with weed whackers and mow it down. The journey for Petrinkus and Baer from the 1980s to the present, it involves more than just an intriguing idea. It involved thousands of hours in the lab, mapping the genome of rice, mining other organisms' genomes for just the right gene to insert in just the right place. After the rice was first grown, years of testing followed to make sure that the rice was safe to eat, and then almost 10 more years as environmentalist opposition prevented the rice from reaching those who might want to plant and eat it. In the Philippines, about a year ago, an angry mob claiming that they were no longer able to control their emotional outbursts broke down a fence and stormed into a field of golden rice. They trampled the rice, ripped it up, and then buried it under the ground just to make sure that it was dead. The rice growing there was going to be used in a feeding trial to see just how much golden rice could help the malnourished. The mob took just 15 minutes to destroy the crop. Now, meanwhile, another clock ticks by, and the number of people who could have been saved from blindness continues to add up. Anti-GMO activists still maintain that the rice could be dangerous to eat, or even more horribly, that they know best, that it won't help. Activists weigh contrived studies with just 20 rats against the lives of those who could have been helped, and they find those lives to be lacking. 20 rats, that's 20 with a T. Okay. So what else have you heard about GMOs? Well, okay, maybe eating them is safe, and maybe it wouldn't be all that bad for poor people to eat them. But what about all those toxic herbicides and pesticides that are used on crops? Those could be causing diseases, we're told. Take glyphosate, for example. One of the most popular traits of genetically engineered foods is an herbicide-tolerant trait. Corn, soybeans, and beets have been engineered to survive when sprayed with a common herbicide, glyphosate. Glyphosate's also the ingredient in Roundup. But we're told that we are dousing the world with a dangerous chemical. In April, I don't know if you heard this in the news, but Chipotle decided to, they're a fast food burrito restaurant, they decided to remove GMO ingredients from their menu. Did you hear that news? Yeah. So Chipotle, a fast food burrito restaurant, decided to go GMO-free on their menu. What was behind the switch, did they say? Well, one thing that they said is that they disapprove of herbicide-tolerant GMOs. In their yearly Cultivate Food Festival, they had a sign explaining their position. Set on top of an intimidating red 50-gallon drum marked glyphosate, the sign read, "Evidence suggests that GMO crops are fueling an escalating arms race with weeds and insects." Yikes. Disease? A chemical arms race? But once again, this is a distortion. Are herbicide-tolerant crops doused with a dangerous herbicide? No. It takes just a coffee cup full of a relatively benign herbicide to deal with weeds on a swath of land the size of a football field. Why was glyphosate chosen as the herbicide to engineer these plants to be resistant to? Because it's about as toxic to human beings as baking soda, yet it's extremely effective. Is it a chemical arms race? No. Some weeds have become resistant to glyphosate, of course. Resistance is a challenge with any herbicide or any pesticide, just like it's a challenge with antibiotics. But the solution is not to ban an herbicide or not to ban GMOs, just like the solution wouldn't be to ban antibiotics. The solution, and that's not the solution besides, because this technology has tremendous benefits. It allows farmers to easily deal with weeds without endangering the plant. Weeds compete for sunlight and resources. They harbor insects. You don't want to harvest them along with your crop. In other words, you don't want weeds in your field. Herbicide tolerance also means that soil doesn't have to be tilled to kill the weeds, which can promote soil health. It's an incredibly useful trait. So what is the solution? Well, instead it's to have more than one herbicide-tolerant plant in your arsenal. But it costs millions of dollars and takes 10 years or more to overcome an onerous regulatory environment just to get a single variety of a single genetically engineered plant approved for planting. It's no wonder why farmers don't have many choices and why the problem of resistance is exacerbated. But remember Chipotle? One of the menu changes they made was from a soybean oil that came from Roundup Ready or glyphosate-tolerant soybeans to a non-GMO sunflower oil. That's what they use to fry their tortillas. But it turns out that the herbicide-tolerant trait is so useful that guess what trait those Chipotle-sourced sunflowers have? That's right, they're herbicide tolerant. What's the difference? What's the difference? Well, the sunflowers are paired with a different herbicide, imazamox. Instead of 28 documented glyphosate-resistant weeds, it's 144 with imazamox. So why is this sunflower, bred by crossing a weed with a sunflower, seen as safe and acceptable and worthy of Chipotle's burritos? Well, Chipotle answered. They said, quote, "Our sunflowers have an herbicide-tolerant trait as the result of natural crossbreeding, not genetic manipulation," unquote. Okay. In other words, the soybeans are judged that way because of the specifics of the technology used to create them. In other words, GMO soybeans are judged as unholy sinners simply because they are GMO. Full stop. Okay. But what about Monsanto? Each year, activists gather for the annual March Against Monsanto, and it's actually happening this weekend on the 23rd. Activists will gather, they'll be wearing hazmat suits and carrying signs. Sometimes they even chain themselves to the doors of Monsanto buildings. These activists have a very specific target and a very specific goal. They want to bring down and crush out the agribusiness Monsanto. People hate Monsanto. Natural News, which is a natural news tabloid, in 2011 readers voted Monsanto the most evil corporation of the year. They're not the only ones. If you Google Monsanto, you may find the Monsanto logo, but you'll also find some incredibly disturbing images. People in hazmat suits coming at corn with syringes, claiming that Monsanto is poisoning the world's food supply and killing millions. Is that true? Is Monsanto really an evil corporation out to poison millions with their deadly frankenfoods just to make a quick buck? Emphatically no. Monsanto has about 22,000 employees worldwide, from salesmen to scientists, and they're focused on bringing farmers the very best seeds that technology has to offer. Monsanto spends about $2 million a day on research and development, searching for ways to make better plants, ways to bring value to farmers. If you call up Monsanto, does a mustache-twirling madman answer the phone? No. What really happens if you're a farmer that wants to plant biotech seeds, if you call up Monsanto, he begins by asking you a series of questions. Where's your farm located? And not just, is it in Illinois or Indiana or Iowa? Off of which road? Is it in a valley? Is it on a hill? How much sunlight does it receive? How much rainfall? What was planted there the year before? What are your goals? What kind of crop do you want to plant and why? What kind of pests are found in the plot of land that you have? And then Monsanto picks out a seed that's tailored just for you. And it's not just Monsanto. Syngenta, BASF, and other agribusinesses sell American farmers the seeds that they prefer to plant. In the United States, 80 to 90% of our big commodity crops, corn, soy, canola, and beets, they're planted with biotech seeds. Farmers are choosing to plant their fields with these seeds in increasing numbers year after year because they're the best option available for the money. Crops that resist insect attacks and allow farmers to easily deal with weeds, they allow farmers to grow more safe and plentiful foods. They're incredibly useful. But that's not how activists see it. Mike Adams, he's the man behind Natural News. Again, that's a nutrition tabloid with millions of readers. He likened Monsanto employees, scientists, journalists, and anybody supporting genetic engineering, he likened them to Nazis, perpetrating a Holocaust on the world. And he's openly called for their killing. He says, quote, "It is the moral right and even the obligation of human beings everywhere to actively plan and carry out the killing of those engaged in heinous crimes against humanity," unquote. Now, Adams takes the attacks against Monsanto to a whole new level, but this idea that there's something shady and probably evil about the agribusiness Monsanto, it's taken root. But the company that offers farmers incredible value and is responsible for moving agriculture forward with the support of genetic engineering and other research options has been so vilified that employees who should be happy and proud to work there are instead ashamed to even mention it. Take Sarah. She's a stay-at-home mom and a former Monsanto employee living in Oregon. And she says sometimes she finds herself shaking in her boots when people ask her a simple question. She describes the experience. She says, quote, "When I'm at the bus stop talking to another neighborhood parent and they say to me, 'What did you used to do before you became a stay-at-home mom?' I get this sinking feeling in my stomach. Do I tell them that I used to work for the very company that created GMOs? A company that many Oregonians consider representative of all that is evil and wrong with our world? Sometimes I just say, oh, I used to be in public relations, or, oh, I'm a photographer," unquote. Now Sarah, she's secretly proud of her former job and she decided to describe her experiences on a blog. That's a good thing. But for employees of a company that push agriculture forward and offer real value to farmers, from the scientists in the lab to the landscapers on the lawn, for them to have any inkling of a feeling that they're of shame or embarrassment or fear when they should be feeling proud is, in my opinion, a great injustice. Okay, fine, Amanda. But what about labeling? Gary Hirschberg, he's the president of Stonyfield Farms. They're an organic yogurt company. He started the Just Label It campaign, and Just Label It on their website puts it perfectly. It says, quote, "While our reasons for wanting to know what's in our food may vary," okay, so we might want to know what's in the reasons for wanting to know may vary, "what unifies us is the belief that it's our right. Without labeling of GMOs, we cannot make informed choices about our food." Well, that sounds good, right? Who could possibly be against more informed consumers making better choices about food? But what's the information that's going to be contained on these labels? Well, the labels tell you that approximately 80% of food on grocery store shelves contain genetically engineered varieties of corn, soybeans, and other fruits and vegetables. Will the labels helpfully inform you that despite the scariness of the term GMO, chances are you ate one for breakfast? Will they tell you that people have eaten trillions of meals containing GMO ingredients and they haven't caused a single ill health effect? Will the labels tell you that farmers have rapidly adopted these engineered varieties because they're easier to grow and keep healthy in the field? No. The labels won't include any of these facts. In fact, I don't think the labels are meant to convey any actual information at all. They're meant to be an intimidating warning that the product contains GMOs. Activists want consumers to see this label in the grocery store and choose not to buy the foods. So what's the real purpose of the labels? Well, activists like Joseph Mercola, he has a natural health website. He's a natural health doctor. He tells us exactly their purpose. Activists view labeling laws simply as a stepping stone to outright bans. He says, quote, "Personally, I believe GM foods must be banned entirely, but labeling, that's the most efficient way to achieve this," unquote. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what's really dangerous that activists aren't talking about. Dihydrogen monoxide. Dihydrogen monoxide is a colorless and odorless liquid. It's been found contaminating many foods like fruit and milk. Accidental inhalation can be fatal, and ingestion of too much can cause cerebral edema, or swelling of the brain. Dihydrogen monoxide sounds like nasty stuff, but it's just the scientific name for water. Dihydrogen is H2, monoxide O. To people who aren't scientifically versed, the name isn't informative, it just sounds scary. Did I fool you? Are you mad at me? You should be. And just keep that in mind every time you hear an activist telling you that they're just helpfully trying to inform consumers. Because activists are really demanding that food manufacturers slap a label on their products, effectively announcing to the world that there's something wrong or dangerous about them. Hiding behind the guise of better informed consumers, they're trying to scare people, like moms trying to make the best choices for their kids, out of buying foods that are in reality just as innocuous as water. Okay, still activists say, what if? Now this is where their arguments find their foundation, if you can call it that. So, I think Greenpeace puts it well. They tell us, quote, "These genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, can spread through nature and interbreed with natural organisms, thereby contaminating non-GE environments and future generations in an unforeseeable and uncontrollable way." Friends of the Earth, they chime in. They say, the ways in which these organisms will act with the natural environment is unpredictable, potentially devastating, and permanent. These activists, they view genetic engineering not as scientists questing to improve food, but as mankind tampering with nature. And after all, how much more intimately can you tamper with nature? Scientists changing the genome of plants, not to improve upon nature for nature's sake or earth for earth's sake. They're changing them for people, for human beings to have more plentiful crops, to eat and grow better foods, with the goal of eating and growing better foods in the future. It's a very human-centered technology. This technology is. Activists subscribe to the idea that if we mess with nature, nature will bite back. VANDANA SHIVA, Indian eco-activist, puts it this way. She says, quote, "Look, you cannot insert a gene you took from a bacteria into a seed and call it life. You haven't created life. Instead, you've only polluted it," unquote. And I think Prince Charles, although he's not a prominent anti-GMO activist, he said a few things over the years, he sums it up perfectly. He says, "This kind of genetic modification takes mankind into realms that belong to God and God alone." Activists subscribe to the idea that genetic engineers working in the lab to solve problems or improve foods are really just playing God. They're claiming powers beyond their proper station. We're supposed to believe that mankind is arrogating itself to the role of creator, and that this tampering with the natural order of things will most certainly end in disaster. That's what you were supposed to answer when activists raise the question, what if something could go wrong? Anti-GMO activists believe that not only should we leave nature alone, but that we should kneel low in fear of it. But the opposite is true. Nature is not some pure Garden of Eden, just waiting for people to go out and pick safe and delicious food. Mankind had to work, to invent, to grow, to innovate in order to change nature into a place that's good for human beings. And we've been doing that successfully for a very long time. I mean, forget about cavemen. I mean, their main activity was just to find enough calories to sustain themselves. Just go back 200 years before the Industrial Revolution. It's night and day. In 1791, George Washington conducted the first census of agriculture. Back then, he found that 90 out of 100 people in America were directly involved in agriculture. What do you think that number is today?
300%.
Yeah, so I hear people, 2 or 3. That's it. Comparing a modern farm to a farm in George Washington's time, it's not hard to see why. Back then, manual labor was the name of the game. People planted seeds with hooves and hands, and if insects attack your crop, there is very little that you could do but stand back and watch nature unfold. A particularly hot or wet year could ruin your harvest. Good years were punctuated by famine and shortages. But today, fossil fuel-powered mega machines zoom across fields, receiving signals from GPS satellites that tell them just when and where to plant the seeds. Monitoring satellites snap pictures of farms in the infrared and send signals to automatic watering systems to make sure that the farms are getting just the right amount of water in just the right place. Watching a farmer zoom about in his glass-encased, air-conditioned lab atop of a machine with tires as big as an elephant caused one scientist, that's me, to remark, "You could do it in a suit and a tie." And those aren't your grandfather's seeds he's planting. Genetically engineered crops designed to grow plentifully, come rain or come shine, are growing in the fields. Now, improving farming, including the seeds that we plant, it's not only a worthy endeavor, but it's a moral one. Improving upon nature is what makes human beings great. But I don't think that anti-GMO activists are too concerned about people. I don't think that consideration for human beings is at the center of their ideas or their judgments. Instead, it's the view that natural is better, for example, that causes anti-GMO activists to hype the negatives, distort the evidence, and to completely ignore the benefits that GMOs have been bringing to the table for the past 20 years. Activists use the idea, or subscribe to the idea that scientists in the lab, they're not inventing successful technology. Rather, they're polluting nature. That must be what causes them to weigh what-ifs against real, better crops, to weigh joke science against the lives of people, like those who could benefit from eating golden rice. That's what must make them decide that mowing down test fields is the right thing to do. Now, you may not be a Monsanto employee or on the verge of vitamin A deficiency, but in a way, we're all victims of these activists. Let me tell you what I mean. Meet Dr. Peggy Lamont. If you visit her office in Koshland Hall on the UC Berkeley campus, you will find corn everywhere. She has corn magnets, corn posters, corn embroidery, covers the wall. It's literally a shrine to corn. It's clear that Dr. Lamont loves plants and loves what she does. She loves being a genetic engineer. And if you ask her, what have you invented in the 20 years that you've been a genetic engineer? She rattles off a list, each more spectacular than the last. She's invented a fast-sprouting barley, could save the brewing industry millions. She's invented what she calls a generic technology, which prevents seeds, which are being stored from sprouting too soon. She's invented a hypoallergenic wheat. It could allow people who are allergic to wheat to enjoy bread, to enjoy pasta. She says that when she mentions this last one, people say things like, "Ooh, where is that? I'd like to have some of that." But the sad truth is that they can't. These inventions, along with others, are locked in the basement of Koshland Hall. Because of the attitudes that anti-GMO activists promulgate, the harsh regulatory environment that's been set up, as a result, these inventions are going to stay locked down there, waiting for a better day, for a more accepting society of the technology of genetic engineering. And Peggy Lamont, she's just one scientist of many. How many good and life-enhancing foods are locked in a basement? And are we ever going to see the technological revolution in food? I think of having my iPhone as having the world in my pocket. I can't imagine that if every time Apple released a new product, activists chained themselves to the doors of Apple headquarters, lobbied for mandatory warning labels, made false claims about how the iPhone would cause cancer, and scared people out of buying it. I can't imagine an Apple employee getting a sinking feeling every time somebody asked them a simple question like, "Where do you work?" If that's how we treated cell phone technology, would I really hold the world in my pocket? Genetically modified seeds are the underappreciated smartphone of agriculture, and they don't belong in a basement. That's not where they belong. Instead of denigrating and protesting and scaring people out of eating these foods, I look forward to a day when people will celebrate and clamor for and won't be able to wait to put these on their table. I think that's a sunny day. And I think it's a sunny day worth fighting for. I hope you do too. Thank you very much.